Hi everyone, it's Jay here, and today I'm going to review the manga and manhwa I read in February. I read 14 volumes, although you could argue I read 18 volumes because of these omnibuses. One of them was a BL standalone, and I started 3 new series as well. I read Yona of the Dawn volumes 20 and 21, and I absolutely loved them. Yona and Riri get taken as slaves in this one, and naturally, Hack and the dragons are furious. Su-won is in this one too, and geez, there are scenes in this that just break my heart. The tribe leaders also featured in this volume, and it is a lot of fun because they are such vibrant characters, especially when they are together. The Wind Tribe. That moment, I won't spoil it, but I was simultaneously laughing my socks off and internally crying. It was so emotional. The fantastic thing about this series is you hate someone and you want to keep hating them, but as the series goes on, it gets ever so slightly harder to hate him. I am clinging on to that hate though, at least at the moment. If you've read it or are currently reading it, you know who I'm talking about. But as I said, these 2 volumes were great, and I spent half my time reading volume 21, squealing and laughing. I would go so far as to say volume 21 is one of the best volumes so far. I started a new series called Full Night and read the first 3 volumes. I really enjoyed reading it, partly because the premise was so interesting and unique. It is set in a dystopian future where Earth is covered in clouds so thick sunlight cannot get through, which means there are no plants, no photosynthesis, and subsequently no oxygen for people to breathe in. Luckily for humanity, scientists have created seeds which can be inserted into the human body and can survive off of the body, which means everyone has enough oxygen to live. Unluckily, the plants take over the body until after about 2 years, that person is a plant. Let me tell you, this makes for some amazing and disturbing artwork. Some panels you just cannot look away from. Kamiya is the main character, and he has to make a decision about whether or not to undergo the process of transfloration, where you have the seed inserted into you and you slowly turn into a plant. Because he has to try and pay for his mother's medication, and if you undergo transfloration, the government gives you a large sum of money, which in turn they get off of civilians in the form of an oxygen tax. And I think this is what's so great about the series. Yes, there's a storyline surrounding Kamiya, but there's also a wider narrative about society in this dystopian future. The workplace laws and seemingly lack of them in terms of workers' rights. There's a moral question, of course, about essentially killing humans slowly for the rest of humanity. It is fantastic, and I implore anyone who likes a darker read to go pick this series up. Volume 4 is out on the 18th of March 2025. I read a BL standalone, The Metalhead Next Door, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Kento is a skint student who almost freezes to death outside his apartment when he's found by his shy neighbour Soshi. A friendship is born, and over time, maybe something a bit more. This is a slow burn romance that really takes its time building their relationship, and I thought it was extremely well done, full of sweet moments and the funniest scene with a kid giving the best advice. This volume is a must read. I started a series called Hate Me But Let Me Stay, and I read the first 2 volumes. This was my first foray into the Omega-verse, and the story follows Naoto, an Omega who was raped as a teen but kept the baby and now has an adorable daughter, and an alpha called Hazuki who is Naoto's mate. I did like it, but I really struggled with the first volume, to the point where if I had only bought the first volume, I wouldn't have continued the series. Why? Because it had things I personally hate reading. For example, a relationship between a 17-year-old and a 21-year-old. That's a 4-year age gap, which, if they were older, say 30, I wouldn't bat an eyelid at that. But this young, it's a significant age gap. Combine that with the multiple almost... I skipped a fair amount of volume 1. I really don't like reading things like that. The second volume, however, redeemed the series. Thanks to a time skip, the characters were older, the youngest is in college, and it doesn't feel icky to read. We get two fantastic storylines that involve communication between the couple, overcoming the difficulties without too much dragging out, and no ridiculously overdramatic moments, which can be so common. And there were some badass moments from both of them at different parts of the volume, which was a lot of fun. I won't say more than that due to spoilers, except that the star of the series is Naoto's daughter, Shizuku. She's so kind and caring towards Naoto and just wants to keep him safe and happy. She's awesome. Volume 3 came out in February and Volume 4 is out in June. Moving on to a more wholesome BL, I read Mobsters in Love Volume 3. This is the final volume of the series, so it's short but sweet. It follows Kashima, who has a massive crush on his mob boss Sawatari. There are still misunderstandings in this one, as well as cute but oh so awkward moments. There were times when I got some really bad second-hand embarrassment, but it was a fun final volume and I'm so glad I picked this series up. If you're looking for a light-hearted BL, try this one out. I read Fiancé Chosen by the Ring volumes 4 and 5. This is a series that began with Felix hurling a wedding ring across a ballroom and smacking Aurora in the head with it. I think the funniest moment of the series. Aurora is now struggling to make a decision between going away to a tower for 5 years to learn her craft, but being unable to see her friends and family, or staying here and seeing where her fake relationship goes with Felix. I still don't understand why she would be cut off from the outside world if she went to the tower. A plot device, I suppose, to force her to choose. But more of a plot begins to develop towards the end of Volume 4, going into Volume 5. The stakes rise because a group of mages are trying to find out who embroidered a piece of material, and it was Aurora. So they have to figure out what the mages are up to. It was an enjoyable enough read, and there's a bit of jealousy going on in Volume 5, which is always fun. If you want a series that's easy to read but never feels stressful with the stakes in the story, this series is for you. And Volume 6 is out on the 25th of March. I picked up Red River, which has been re-released in omnibus format. I read a bit of it when I was a lot younger online. I think it was originally published in the 90s in Japanese and then published in English in 2004, and has since had multiple volumes out of print, making it very expensive to buy the whole series, which is why I didn't buy the individual volumes, because some were going for crazy prices. So when Viz Media announced they were going to re-release Red River, people were very happy. It follows Yuri, who is happily living her life in modern-day Japan, when one day hands come out of some water and grab her, dragging her into the past. Very far into the past, to ancient Anatolia. It's in the 1300s, I believe, during the Hittite Empire. I'll come back to the history part in a moment. Overall, I really enjoyed reading the first 6 volumes, and there are both good and bad points about the series. The bad things really boil down to the fact that some of it just hasn't aged well. Yuri is a 15-year-old girl, so it's uncomfortable to read about her almost getting raped a number of times. It has that awful feel about it sometimes, when there's no consent, and yeah, it's not great at all in that area. But I haven't stopped reading the series, because I'm really enjoying it. The setting is fantastic. When was the last time you read a story based in the Hittite Empire? For me, never. And the mangaka, Chie Shinohara, is clearly fascinated by this period in history. At the start of one of the volumes, she mentions that she travelled to Turkey, Syria, Jordan, and other Middle Eastern countries, and to me, that is so cool. She's taken an interest in a part of history, travelled around to discover more, and then written a great series in that time period. And the main character, Yuri, has her moments of bravery and selflessness that make her really likeable. It is also amusing to see how her general modern day knowledge randomly helps her out in different situations. But in ways that surprise me, because as a modern day reader, of course we know about certain materials and the importance of hygiene, but when it's thrown into a story set in the 1300s, it's a shock to everyone. which also made me glad to have been born in more recent times, because there are so many things that we take for granted nowadays. For example, hygiene. It's an important thing, and the sick house in this volume, well, if you've read it, you know, but so grim. I enjoyed the second omnibus a lot more than the first one. There was more politics, action, and Yuri being a bit of a badass. The third omnibus is coming out in April of this year. Last but certainly not least, I read volume 2 of Beware the Villainess. I am thoroughly enjoying this series, which begins with a modern day college student waking up in the body of Melissa, a villainess in a romance novel. The brilliance of this series is that she doesn't want the guy. She thinks she's surrounded by vile men and just wants to live a quiet life of luxury. This volume starts with Melissa hatching a plan to avoid her fiancé proposing to her at the upcoming ball, because he's a cheating scumbag and she's having none of it. Shout out to her maid Yona, who is hilarious and puts up with Melissa's moods and crazy ideas with her own level of sass. The heroine of the story appears in this one, as well as other new characters, and I have to say I laughed a lot during this. Jack Photon is a werewolf and a great addition to the story. His interactions with Melissa are hilarious. It's not all fun and games though. There is quite a poignant scene near the end between her and Melissa's younger self that I have never seen before in a villainess isekai setting like this, although I am no expert in this genre. As always, the art is great in this and the expressions are priceless throughout. If you haven't picked this series up yet, I highly recommend you do. I can't wait for volume 3 to come out in April. So these are the volumes I read in February 2025. I had much more success with what I read this month, after January's reads, which ranged from awesome to DNFing a series because the first volume was so bad. Let me know what you've read recently. Do you have any recommendations for me? Have you got any thoughts on these series? Let me know in the comments below. Happy reading, everyone. Bye!